Hi guys, today we'll be painting a mildly kit-bashed Space Wolf Primaris Lieutenant. I started off with a base coat of Chaos Black, which is then followed by a coat of German Red Brown through an airbrush. I just cover the entire model with it. Once this is dry, I coat the model with chipping medium. You can apply this in 2 thin coats. Wait till it's completely dry before you continue. It will keep a wet look, so just let it dry for an hour. This is then followed by a black coat through an airbrush on the entire model. Using shadow gray in a top-down manner, I paint all the armor. Again, this is through an airbrush. Once that's dry, this is followed by a top-down highlight using wolf gray. I stay on the outside of the model and only paint the parts that would be in the light. Once that's completely dry, I coat the entire model with water and use a good amount of water. The water activates the chipping medium. This also means that in the previous layers you shouldn't add water to your paint. I chip the model using a sturdy brush with sturdy bristles. Once I'm happy with the result I get, I use wolf gray and I paint a little highlight around most of the chips. I make sure I stay at the bottom of the chips to give it a more natural look. Using old copper, I now block in all the golden parts on the model. Once the old copper is dry, I wash the golden parts with Agrax Earthshade. Using tan, I block in the skin. After that I block in the metallic parts using gunmetal. The gunmetal parts are then followed by a wash of null oil. Same as with the Agrax on the golden parts, this helps achieving a shade later on. Once the null oil is dry, I use gunmetal to apply a highlight, top-down highlight to the metallic parts. Using Reichland Flash Shade, I'll wash the skin tone to achieve a shade on that as well. This is then I took the silver to make a final highlight on the metallic parts. Using Dwarven Gold, I now highlight the golden parts. I do this in with a gently dry brush on the entire golden pieces. Using silver, I will apply a final edge highlight to the gold, and I make sure I stay on the outer sides of the golden parts. This is then followed by a wash of Seraphim Sepia. I used a pretty thick wash in this case to make the gold look a bit duller. In my personal feeling, that fits Space Wolves better. Then using tan, I highlight the skin. I highlight the upper parts only and stay away from the recesses. Using a mixture of 1 part tan and 1 part elf skin tone, I then reinforce these highlights. This is then followed by a consecutive highlight by adding 1 part of elf skin tone to the previous mixture. I make sure I leave the previous layers a little bit visible. This is purely to strengthen the effect. Using dark gray, I then block in the casing of the bolter. I also paint a wolf tail. Using Nalden oil, I'll then wash the wolf tail. I'm not going to wash the bolter casing with it. And using earth, I'll block in the parchments and the bone parts on the model. Using a mixture of 4 parts dark gray and 1 part dead white, I apply a rough edge highlight to the bolter casing. I make this a fairly thick layer, only leaving a little bit of the previous layer visible. By adding 2 parts dead white to the mixture, I then apply an edge highlight. Using gold gray, I dry brush the wolf tail on its back. This is then followed by a dry brush of dead white from roughly halfway of the wolf tail to the bottom. Using Agrax Earthshade, I wash the parchments and the bone to achieve a shading effect on them. Using Scrofulous Brown, I now paint in the right shoulder pad, and I want it to be yellow. And I try to avoid the chips, but I found out that the Scrofulous Brown wasn't covering as well as I wanted to. So I painted away quite some of the chips, and I painted them back in with German Red Brown. Using a mixture of 4 parts golden yellow and 1 part Scrofulous Brown, I then apply a rough highlight to the shoulder pad. By adding 2 parts dead white to the mixture, I apply a last highlight. I stay on the upside of the model, so it keeps in line with how the rest of the model is highlighted. The sharp line that's created isn't that bad because there will be a transfer on it later on. Using earth, I'll then highlight both the bone and the parchments. With a mixture of 1 part earth and 1 part bone white, I then apply a next highlight to the bone and the parchment. I make sure I leave the previous layers visible so that the color is built up gradually. This is then followed by a highlight of bone white, and for the bone parts it's the last highlight. For the parchment, I'll make a mixture after this, consisting of 1 part bone white and 1 part dead white, to give it a more paper-like appearance. You see me apply that highlight right now. Again, I make sure I stay on the outside, leaving previous work visible on the parchment. Using a 1-to-1 mixture of charred brown and earth, I now paint in the pouches on the back of the marine. Once that's dry, that's followed by a wash of Agrax earthshade. This is then followed by once dry, this is followed by a highlight of again a mixture of 1 part charred brown and 1 part earth. I make sure I leave the deepest shades absolutely untouched. Once that's dry, I apply a thin edge highlight to the pouches of pure earth. Using Beastie Brown, I now block in the hair on the model. Don't forget about the facial hair. The first highlight on the hair is a mixture of 1 part Beastie Brown and 1 part Desert Yellow. By adding 1 part bone white to the mixture, I apply the next highlight, and on the side of the hair, I start roughly halfway and working upwards, and on the top of the head, I don't go all the way back. By adding 1 part dead white to this mixture, I apply basically it's a edge highlight to the edge of the hair, where it goes to the top, and on the top it's a thin line on the outside of the model. You can use a striking manner. We're using stripes going from the middle forward. Using dark flesh tone, I paint in the handle of the sword, and using gory red, I'll highlight this handle by just painting the upper ribs. This is then followed by a highlight of bloody red, staying only on the upside of the model. Using night blue, I block in the entire blade of the power weapon. Using Adriatic blue through an airbrush, I start creating the light effect. You could mask the large parts of the blade to do this, but I find this way as a good enough result for a tabletop model. By adding white to the Adriatic blue, so making it roughly a 50-50 mix. I apply a next layer. I make sure the previous layer of Adriatic blue is well visible. This is followed by a final highlight towards the edges of white. Again, this is all through an airbrush. Using dead white, I now paint a line around the blade on both the edges. I also paint a line in the middle of the blade. This finishes up this model. I applied some transfers and finished up the basing. Applied a matte varnish to the entire model, which you see here. So guys, I hope you liked this video. Please like, share and subscribe. If you didn't like the video, let me know what you didn't like about it. I hope to see you next time. Thanks for watching, guys.